These are 6 cavers who went underground in the Yorkshire Dales on a fine summer afternoon in 1967, and who are still down there today. This is the story of Mossdale Caverns, the worst caving accident in British history. Mossdale sits about 5 kilometres north of Grassington in North Yorkshire, 425 metres up at the foot of a limestone cliff called Mossdale Scar. There, a stream named Mossdale Beck crosses open moorland and vanishes straight into the ground. Grade 5 is the highest difficulty grade British cavers use, and Mossdale carries it. Around 10.5 kilometres of passage have been mapped, much of it passable only on hands and knees, some of it neck deep in water, and reaching the far end and returning takes between 8 and 10 hours. The real problem is flooding, and it does not arrive gradually. The Council of Northern Caving Club still warns that passages minutes inside the entrance fill to the roof in flood, and that Mossdale should be considered only after 2 full days of dry weather, with absolute certainty of no rain during the trip. Understanding why anyone entered it means going back to the 1930s. Eli Simpson, a founder of the British Speleological Association, worked through old geological records and mine plans covering Grassington Moor, and became convinced that a large, undiscovered cave system lay beneath it. Simpson brought in a fellow member named Bob Leakey, who faced an immediate staffing problem because the Second World War had stripped the area of able-bodied men. Leakey solved it by recruiting female co-workers from the Yaden aircraft factory to help search Mossdale Scar. On the 31st of May, 1941, Leakey dropped his tobacco pipe. Hunting for it, he found an entrance, and that entrance opened up Mossdale Caverns. None of that was the real prize, though. The water sinking at Mossdale Scar, averaging around 100 liters every second, has been traced by dye testing to a resurgence called Black Keld, 4.4 kilometers away and 225 meters lower down. Nobody has ever found the passage joining the two, and cavers call it the missing link. Break into it, and you would be standing in one of the deepest and longest cave systems in Britain. To the cavers of the 1960s, that possibility justified the risk, which brings the story to the 24th of June, 1967. June had handed the Dales a long dry spell that year, giving conditions close to ideal for potholing with very little flood risk. 10 cavers walked into Mossdale that afternoon, 8 men and 2 women, and at the entrance, they split into 2 groups. 6 of them went deep. Dave Adamson, 26 years old, led the trip, and with him went Jeff Boireau at 24, Colin Vickers at 23, John Ogden at 21, Bill Frakes at 19, and Michael Ryan, the youngest, at 17. Between them, they represented several northern caving clubs, with links to the Leeds University Speleological Association and to the Bradford and Happy Wanderers clubs. Colette Lord, Jim Cunningham, John Shepherd, and Morag Forbes made up the other 4, and their plan reached no further than Rough Chamber, roughly 40 minutes underground, before turning back. What the deep party actually intended down there remains disputed by the people who were present. Several accounts describe a plan to blast and excavate at the southern end of the mud caverns. A caver who was invited and declined said publicly 50 years later that nobody had mentioned extending the cave and that he understood it as a sightseeing trip. The question has never been settled. The 4 surfaced at 5 o'clock into light rain, nothing that worried them at that stage. 3 of them left for Ingleton, and Morag Forbes, 22 years old, and engaged to Dave Adamson, stayed behind. By late afternoon, the weather over the fells above the cave had turned to thunderstorms and heavy rain. Around 7:30, Forbes walked out to the scar and found the water looking much as it had. Around 9, she went out a second time. Mossdale Beck was in full flood, and a lake had formed across the ground in front of the scar. She ran somewhere between 2.5 and 3 miles across open moorland, and the Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Association took the call at 10 minutes past 11 that night. More than 300 people worked at Mossdale over the following 4 days in what is described as the largest rescue operation ever mounted in Britain. The advance party reached the scar at 1:15 in the morning and found the entrance under about 4 feet of water. 12 fire brigade pumps were running by 3, achieving almost nothing, even though no rain had fallen since midnight. At 5 o'clock came the decision to bring in heavy digging equipment and move Mossdale Beck out of its bed entirely, and much of that early work went in by hand. By 8 that morning, the Beck had dropped far enough for teams to reach rough chamber. Hope was still reasonable, because the missing men were well equipped and considered capable of sitting out a flood for anywhere between 12 and 48 hours in one of the cave's high avens. 20 to 6 on the Monday evening, a search team reported 5 bodies in the far part of Far Marathon West Passage. One man was still unaccounted for. Bob Leakey, who had found the cave 26 years earlier and was by then 53, was called in to search for him. He led a party to a spot where he believed the missing man might have survived, and flood risk forced him to turn back. That was the last caving trip Leakey ever made. One of the men who went underground with him wrote his account only in 2017. The seriousness landed on him, he explained, when the policeman at the entrance began writing down the names of everyone going in along with their next of kin. Leakey took him beyond rough chamber and asked him to wait alone in the dark while he searched further in. He sat there and watched a small pile of pebbles he had built, checking whether the water was creeping up it. At 3:10 on the Wednesday morning, a party led by Brian Boardman of the Cave Rescue Organization located the 6th man. John Ogden lay jammed vertically in an extremely tight rift, about 15 feet from 3 of the others, buried in silt so completely that only his boots, his socks, his laces, and part of a white helmet showed. Len Huff, one of the rescue leaders, put it plainly afterwards. Their luck had run out, and the weather changes quickly in that part of the world. The inquest opened at Skipton in July. Coroner Stephen Brown returned a verdict of misadventure, judged recovery too dangerous, and ordered the cave sealed as a grave, and the jury called that sealing a very wise decision. The caving community disagreed, and strongly. The dam and diversion channel that had made the cave workable were being dismantled. The only safe entrance was being blocked, and numerous unstable, flood-prone entrances remained open along the shattered cliff face. Regardless, sealing Mossdale did not make it safer. Sealing it made any future rescue harder. All of that had been set out in a statement circulated before the inquest to the coroner's office, the West Riding Police and the Home Office, backed formally by the British Speleological Association and the Cave Research Group. None of that evidence reached the lay jury, who returned the verdict, and afterwards the coroner's office rejected the views and questioned the authority of the people who had written them. 4 years on, in 1971, the cavers went back. Investigating the legal position came first, and the answers surprised everyone. The Home Office, the coroner, and the police all turned out to hold no jurisdiction over the cave whatsoever, and the seal itself carried no legal significance. Both rescue organizations now accepted that Mossdale was more dangerous with the seal in place than without it. The entrance lies on common land at Conistone Moor, and nobody actually owns it. At a meeting, most of the local gateholders opposed any further exploration for fear of a repeat, and they agreed to the burial anyway, on the condition that the entrance be resealed afterwards. The parents gave their consent unanimously, and their blessing with it. 9 club members carried out the work during a dry spell in February, 8 of them underground and 1 on the surface, with no publicity before or afterwards, so that only the people involved ever knew it had happened. They laid the remains in a high-level chamber in the mud caverns, above the floodline, known among cavers ever since as the Sanctuary. Dave Brooke, who wrote the fullest account of it, argued for a permanent fix as well, a bridge and sluice on the Conistone track that could be closed whenever a party was underground. Mossdale, in his words, was the Everest of British caving, and there was no reason it also had to be the Eiger. The sluice was never built. A memorial plaque is fixed to the cliff above the entrance today, and higher up on the moor stands a cairn, its plaque stating that it sits over the place in the cave where the bodies were found. 50 years on, in 2017, there was a memorial walk and a service at the small church of St. Mary's in Conistone, attended by many who had been on that moor in 1967. One correction is worth making because the error appears almost everywhere. Mossdale gets routinely described as permanently closed with access banned, and that held true for decades. It is no longer the position. The Council of Northern Caving Clubs records the current access status as no restrictions. The cave sits on access land, and no permission is required from anyone. What has not changed is the hazard. Cavers do still go in. The connection to Black Keld has still never been found. 6 people entered Mossdale Caverns on the 24th of June, 1967, hunting for a passage that would have joined one of the largest underground drainage systems in Britain. They never found it, and they never came out. 59 years later, the passage remains undiscovered, and the 6 of them remain where their friends laid them, in a chamber above the floodline. The accident alone is not what makes Mossdale worth studying. Everything that followed is an inquest that heard no expert evidence, a decision the best qualified people believe made the cave more dangerous, and a group of cavers who researched the law themselves, went to the families, went to the landowners, and quietly finished the job one February, because nobody else was going to do it for them.